RFK Jr. is now the most powerful health official in America, running the very institution he spent years suing. He has a budget of over $1.7 trillion and sits at the table with President of the United States, Donald Trump. Today, I'm sitting down with Isabel Vincent, the investigative journalist whose new book, RFK Jr., The Fall and Rise, has just hit shelves. You're going to want a copy. Trust me. And now I'm going to bring on Isabel, and we will discuss the man, the myth, the legend, and what's up with that raccoon penis. Hey, Isabel, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And congratulations on the new book.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Of course, anytime. If for anyone who doesn't know out there, Isabel is a prolific writer and breaks news constantly in the New York Post and in other books about other politicians we all need to know about, because damn, do they try to hide it. But Isabel gets it right out. All right, Isabel, the first question. It's about the Kennedy name as currency. It's really interesting to me because your book does dig into how RFK Jr. traded on the Kennedy legacy his entire life, yet the Kennedy family seems to want nothing to do with him. So how much is his political rise predicated on his last name? How much of it is simply the most powerful brand name in American politics?
That's a good way to put it. It's certainly a powerful brand name in American politics, and he uses his father's legacy, Robert Kennedy, who was assassinated in 1968, and his uncle's legacy, JFK, who was killed in 1963. He's constantly invoking them in speeches, and the other Kennedys. I mean, it's fascinating. The other Kennedys criticize Bobby Jr. for doing this, but they do it themselves. So when you say it's like the most powerful brand name in politics, they can't get away from it, even though they accuse each other of doing the same thing. So I think it was really important to his rise. He recognized that. He's used it his whole life. Just to give you an example, when he joined the anti-vax charity, the Children's Health Defense, they had something like, I don't know, a few $100,000 in their coffers. By the time he left, about 10 years later, they were up to 13 million. Why? Because of the Kennedy last name. People are much more willing to donate. And the same thing happened with Riverkeeper, the environmental charity that he was a big part of for a long time. And somebody a former member of the board actually told me that they didn't want to kick him out when they sort of had enough with him because his last name brought in so much money. So you are right to say it's total political currency.
So let's talk about the diaries that you have. In doing this book and in your research, you got to view RFK Jr.'s personal diaries. How did you get a hold of them? What years were they active? And what were the most surprising thing that you found in these diaries? I mean, that's very personal.
So a year after his second wife, Mary Richardson, committed suicide, a very good source of mine called me and wanted to meet for dinner at a restaurant on the Upper East Side. And we had dinner. I went to the bathroom. When I came back, there were these volumes of the diaries. I didn't know what they were, in a plastic bag hanging from my chair. The source, who I can't reveal who that is, didn't say a word. And I took them on the subway and I realized what they were. And I realized that there were some weird things in there, like the fact that he would keep he kept a ledger at the back with names of women who he'd slept with, and he graded them from 1 to 10. So with 10 meaning he'd gone all the way. Now on some of them there was no number, but the word victory next to the woman's name, and that meant that he had resisted temptation. So these diaries were kept, and he's talked about this as a result of him going to AA meetings and doing the 12-step program. So he was a heroin addict, and in order to deal with that, he went to these meetings and he wrote down everything that was happening. And so what I was surprised by was how guilty a person he is, and every day sort of dealing with temptation and trying to hold on to his Catholic religion, and just being a total disappointment to his father. He writes about this in a bunch of entries where he says, I knew Daddy was looking down on me from heaven, and I knew that he loved me, but I had failed him in, absolutely everything. And that meant that he couldn't get a handle on his womanizing, on his, well, he did get a handle on the heroin addictions, but that he wasn't being the best person that he could be. And that totally surprised me, because you have this view now of him, which is almost caricatured, of him being this crazy guy who, picks up dead animals off the side of a road. But in reading the diaries and doing research and talking to people who knew him and who've known him for many years, I got more of a sense of who he was. And that was my whole purpose, was just to round out who this guy is.
And just to be clear, when he was writing about these women, this was during his marriage to Mary, correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
And that some of these women were her friends, correct?
Correct. And some of them were, some of them were names that we would know. And when I started doing these stories for the Post, we made a decision, me and the editors, not to expose the women because, it wasn't fair. So I've never exposed who they were. But yes, and this was very painful to Mary. So Mary is going through her own crises. She's in and out of rehab. She's got, she's on antidepressants. She's got her own issues. She's mad at him over the womanizing, but also the fact that she's been left at home with 4 little kids in Westchester while he goes around the world, being Mr. Environmental Crusader, giving speeches all over the place and, just being a great guy, and then comes home and doesn't seem to help her with, the childcare. And there are instances in the diary where he says, here she is again, waving the kids' schedule in my face and being mean to me. And I'm thinking, dude, I can really see where she's coming from at this point. That you can't understand that maybe you could take the kids to soccer once in a while. So, that's the situation you've got, and it escalates over their marriage. They get married in 1994. Mary commits suicide in 2012. But by the time she did, she seemed to be in a better place. She was also going to AA. She was getting her life back together. But by that point, they were involved in a very bitter and protracted divorce.
Well, and it was that divorce that was interesting. So he's now married to Cheryl Hines, whom he met when he was still with Mary.
Correct.
And please go ahead.
No, they were, he got together with Cheryl Hines while he was going through the divorce. So just to be clear, they never got a divorce. Mary died a Kennedy wife, which was her whole sort of raison d'etre in life. She had grown up close to Carrie Kennedy, his younger sister. They'd gone to school together. She, from the time she was 14, she was hanging out at Hyannisport. She knew all the Kennedys, and she really wanted to be a Kennedy. Like, this was her whole thing. When they separated, Ethel Kennedy, Bobby's mother, sort of prohibited her from going to Hyannisport, and she was devastated. So she was devastated by all of this. In the meantime, Bobby's going out with Cheryl Hines, and Cheryl Hines is posting on social media, probably not thinking much about it, but posting pictures of her hanging out with Bobby's kids, with Bobby and Mary's kids. They had 4 children. And Mary is devastated by this. At some point, Cheryl does take it down. does take the social media stuff down, but for people around Mary told me that really hurt her.
Well, it's interesting because Cheryl had her own book out. And let's pop it right up here. It's interesting because in her book, Unscripted, Cheryl was very careful to say that, yes, she met Bobby, but nothing happened. They were introduced through Larry David, nothing happened. And then they only really got together after Mary had died.
That's
what's
not
going
true.
on here?
Yeah, that's not
Okay.
true. They were together while Mary was alive, which is why Mary was so upset about it. And if you notice the date, if you go back in history, the date that they say they met each other for the first time, which was in the early 2000s, it keeps changing. So I'm not clear when they really met. They say that they met at a Riverkeeper event in Banff in Canada, and it was a skiing event, and she didn't have a ski hat. He gave her his, and it all sounded very innocent and nice. And then they get together later, but they make the point that they didn't get together until she was divorced from Paul Young, her ex-husband, and that Bobby was like fully separated from Mary. So okay, but he was still seeing her while Mary was alive, and then they get married. I guess a year or two years after Mary's death.
Right.
But one of the things that really weighed on Mary was the threats that Bobby allegedly made, and this is coming from people who knew him at the time and who knew Mary, about her losing custody of the children. And so when because Mary had her own issues
Right.
with
Alcohol.
substance abuse. So this was something that really weighed on her. And at one point, her daughter Kira, as a 16-year-old, goes to live in Los Angeles with Cheryl. And Cheryl talks about it in her book, and she talks about how she went before the new school year started, so that she could go to school in September. And so I believe from Cheryl's book, from what I read and, did the math over how old Kira would have been at the time, that this happened maybe 8 months before Mary's suicide. And I'm not saying that, anybody's responsible for anybody's suicide, because who knows why people commit suicide, but it just seemed like a bit of an insensitive thing when you're dealing with a woman who's going through so much anguish. Now, Cheryl has come out, because this has come out, after my book came out. She has denied that was the case, and she has said that Kira went to live with her after Mary's death. But that's not what it sounds like in her biography.
Interesting. And also, it seems odd because during her social posting, she was saying stuff like, my kids, and I'm their mom. And in the book, she was like, and now I'm a mom of like 3 instead, or however many kids they have,
5,
instead of just one.
5, yeah.
And you're right. It did seem insanely insensitive, but also now, there's that old adage, right? If he does it with you, he's going to do it to you.
Right, and that's what happened with Mary. He was married to Emily Black when they started dating, and Mary was pregnant with Connor, her first child, when they got married. So the same thing happens while he's still married to Mary with Cheryl Hines. And then let's look at Olivia Nuzzi, and everything that led up to that. Mm-hmm. I mean, we don't know how many other women he might have slept with, and judging from my research in the diaries, I don't think he stopped that. And also, the way he describes it is that women threw themselves at him. And actually, at first I thought, oh yeah, you're the victim, whatever, you're not taking responsibility. But then, as I started talking to more and more people, I realized that is partly true. He's a Kennedy. There's, and I think Olivia Nuzzi in her book is like quite honest about her attraction to him. And there's this scene where, they're on FaceTime, and he's lying on his bed, and and he's wearing a pink shirt, and you can see it. You can see the attraction. And so I talked to a lot of other women who said the same thing, that, it was like, of course I'm going to sleep with Bobby Kennedy. So I think there might be truth in when he says he was mugged, and he called it mugging when women would seduce him, or he would seduce them. And again, I always read it as him not taking responsibility for it. But I think that we have to cut him some slack. I think women did throw themselves at him.
Right. But even then, even if that happened, there still has to be personal responsibility of, no,
Exactly.
I'm married. I've made a commitment. And
Exactly.
now he's got Cheryl saying, well, we've talked about it and it's fine.
Yep.
And Olivia saying, well, it was an emotional relationship. They might have sexted on their phones or whatnot on their devices. But there have been other reports from other media outlets that even in his MAHA group, the Make America Healthy Again group, that he was having inappropriate relationships.
Oh, I'm not surprised. Again, like, why would there be such a big change? He is a very fervent Catholic. At least he's always, agonizing about not being a better Catholic in his diaries, but it doesn't seem to translate when it comes to adultery. And I don't want to be a prude about it, but it's kind of crazy. And I mean, the numbers beside women's names, I was like,
well, it's high schoolish. It's very childish. It's like he's still mentally kind of 14.
Well, you know what? That's the age that his dad was assassinated. That's the age where he spiraled downward into drugs, got kicked out of 2 boarding schools, and became a full-blown heroin addict. So that actually, you mentioning 14 is really interesting, because that's when it all starts to go downhill for him.
Interesting. So he's kind of like, if you would say, a dry drunk, somebody who might have gotten sober but still has the underlying issues of trauma.
Right. Oh, yeah, I think so. Absolutely. And I think his whole life has been predicated on, he's been told his whole life that he has to fulfill the Kennedy legacy. He is the heir to Camelot. He is the one who's going to be president. It was really interesting. I was researching the book that Andy Warhol in his diaries talks about him, because they were known to each other. They were friendly. And Andy Warhol's at an event in 1980. It would have been the engagement party of his younger brother, Michael Chivicki. And Andy Warhol's there. And he's listening to the speeches, and Senator Ted Kennedy gives a speech. And this is at the time when Ted is running for president. And then Bobby stands up and gives a speech. And Andy Warhol says he gave the best speech, meaning Bobby. He's the one who's going to be president. And I was just like really interested to read that, from 1980. And then, fast forward 2023, he's running for president. And I think he'll run again.
I wouldn't be shocked myself. Now, here's the deal. He's done some pretty disgusting things personally, but he actually has done some interesting things professionally. He did River Keepers. We have oysters in the East River in New York now because of RFK Jr. He also then started MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. And here, I just want to couch this. Whatever people think about vaccines, he did talk about, as you said earlier, reading the fine print, which I think everyone should always read a fine print. At this point, I think I owe my life to Apple, because I just sign anything when I need a new device. But when we get to MAHA and Make America Healthy Again, he has done some interesting things, but he's done some things that are, how do I put this? Kind of backwards, like turning the food pyramid upside down and constantly working out in his jeans. I'm about to pull this up because this is one of my favorite pics of all times. Him with Kid Rock in a sauna, working out in jeans and no shoes. And of course, there they are hanging out after. But the thing for me, Isabel, is Is he being used by the Trump administration? A lot of people are saying, well, he earned it. He started MAHA. He might be a doctor or a nutritionist, but he started these big movements and he got Americans talking about this. But as you say, he actually wanted to be president and he was running. And according to several books, he was flirting with the Democrats. But once the Democrats said, no way, get out of here, he said, fine, I'll go to Trump. And Trump brought him along. And a lot of people are saying, well, they brought him along because they wanted his constituency. And that with his last name, it gave Trump a veneer of legitimacy.
Oh, I think you've touched on something so important. And yes to that, but also he was polling up to 12% in some of the battleground states when he was running for president. So he brought to Trump this tremendous movement, these Make America Healthy Again, like followers. And I think that in order to understand Donald Trump's victory, you have to understand who Bobby Kennedy is. And going back to what he believes, what he doesn't believe, people who were very close to him told me that he honestly believes that what he's doing is the best for humanity. Like, I know that sounds crazy. And I know that, he's guilty of also being an opportunist. He made a lot of money when he was in the environmental movement. He became a millionaire several times over by suing, big polluters. And now, with the vaccines, he's going after big pharma. But he really does believe, and he really does believe in everything he says. And he's very happy to be in the presidential cabinet. This is like a dream come true. This is a guy who collected, he's actually got power, and he has the ability to change people's lives, whether you agree with what he's doing or not. For him, it's this ultimate moment. It's this heroic, great moment in his life. This is a guy who collected, signatures of all the presidents. He had them framed at his home in Westchester on a wall. He's obsessed. He's been obsessed his whole life with the presidency. I think he's totally proud of himself of being one of the people in President Trump's cabinet. But I think he wants to go. I think he wants to go further, and I think he will be a candidate in 2028, just based on everything I've seen. Yeah, I mean, he said no. He's been asked about it and said no, but I think he's just being coy. Like,
wow.
And I think that's one of the reasons that that marriage, that politically expedient marriage right now. I mean, they claim that they had this moment where they talked about everything after the Olivia Nuzzi scandal. But people around him, again, told me that he felt he couldn't afford another divorce. This would have been a second divorce. So he divorced, he divorced his first wife, Emily Black, but he never divorced Mary. She died, but they were still married. And so it maybe even be perceived as a third divorce because people don't quite know, how the law works. Like if you die, it doesn't mean that you're divorced if you're going through the process and don't actually get divorced.
That's fascinating, though. So even after everything, and I'm just going to list a few, okay? Mm-hmm. Even after measles outbreaks that people tried to blame on him, even after the scandals of outside affairs of his marriage, Olivia Nuzzi's book, Cheryl Hines's book, and of course, the insanely weird workouts in genes, which we just talked about, as well as what Cheryl put in her book as a fascination for animals. And, you write in this book about a dead raccoon. Would you care to expound on the raccoon?
Sure. I've been in his head for almost 13 years, and I didn't think so much of this scene, but in one scene in his diaries, he writes about going down a highway and stopping when he sees a dead raccoon. So he always stops at roadkill, and he's got all of his kids in the van. He's got 4 of his kids in with Mary in the van, and he stops. He gets out. He gets a knife. He cuts the penis off the dead raccoon to sort of study later. And he's thinking while he's doing this that so many people in his family are weird. And I'm like, wow, what a disconnect. He thinks it's normal what he's doing, and the kids are waiting patiently in the car. So to put all of that into context, because there was the dead bear that he had, that he left in Central Park, the roadkill bear cub that he picks up. There's the whale that he straps to the top of his van, and the blood is dripping down as he's driving. When he was a kid, he wanted to be a vet. That was his biggest dream. His parents really encouraged him. This is when his father was alive, obviously, got him a job at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., had an after-school job. His father bought him a falcon. He became sort of a champion falconer. Like, he's very serious about that. He is in love with the animal kingdom. People talk about him collecting seagull skulls and having, this big arrangement of the seagull skulls in his home. So he's genuinely interested in the natural world. And so when I was reading that, I thought, oh, okay, it's just Bobby being Bobby. And of course it's exploded, everybody's picked up on that, but I guess it really is weird. But for him, it's not. It's totally normal.
And even after all this, he may still actually run. You believe he will actually run
Yeah.
again. Do you think his numbers are higher now or lower than when he ran first?
I don't know. I think they have to be higher because he's been much more out there, and I think there's a part of the United States, there's a portion of people, like I spoke to all these, radio hosts in the South during, just after my book came out, a promotion for my book, and a lot of them are like, oh my God, he's like the best thing out there. And he's got, he's really played on that. Like, he's, in addition to the working out in his jeans, I don't know if you've seen the cartoons he has of himself in a boxing ring, like knocking out a Twinkie at one point, make America healthy again. So he's putting himself out there. He has a podcast now where he's going to be discussing health. He's doing that for a reason. And I think he's doing it to set up for a presidential run. I think he's going to do it. And again, he's being coy about it. Oh, I'm not going to run for president, but I think he will.
Well, and it's fascinating. How does he deal with the fact that his family has kind of disowned him? He's not really wanted anymore. They've come out and publicly trashed him, and he's not invited to family gatherings. How is he dealing with that when that really is so much of his identity?
So I think, so the family, the JFK side of the family, so Caroline, Jack Schlossberg, they didn't like him to begin with. Like, those families didn't, that branch of the family never got along with the Robert Kennedy branch of the family. Robert Kennedy branch of the family, Robert Kennedy, Ethel Skakel, they were deemed by the other side to be like completely nuts. The kids had no discipline. At one point, I read in a biography long ago that Bobby Shriver, his cousin's parents, were like, we don't want the kids hanging out with the Skakel Kennedy kids because they're all doing drugs and we don't want them to influence you. So there's always been divisions in the family. Now, his own siblings going against him is very interesting. But I don't think it's all of them. Certainly Max and Douglas, I think, still have his back. And even though Carrie, who is the executive director of the Robert F. Kennedy Foundation, the Human Rights Foundation they have, she's written a lot of letters and posted them to X saying, my brother shouldn't be trusted. He's sending us down the wrong path. But they have a history of being so close that I'm really wondering if this isn't just a temporary public posturing to make sure that, the ones who are still backing the Democratic Party are truly backing the Democratic Party. And I think, that was it was a big political split rather than being a family split. I could be wrong about that, but their background together is just so strong that I think some of it is posturing.
Well, I also find it ironic because a lot of the the JFK Kennedy side turned their back on him and touted him as kind of a fraud and didn't stand for anything, went for whichever way the wind blew. But now Jack Schlossberg, JFK Jr.'s grandson, is running to be a representative in the House of Congress for New York City, and he doesn't seem to run for do anything at all. His tax returns have a big fat zero on them. He's overeducated from Harvard, a school that has the Kennedy name on it, so I doubt they're not going to let a Kennedy go. But he hasn't ever really had a job and doesn't really stand for anything except for, I hate Trump. And isn't it ironic? Yes. Yeah. And isn't it ironic that, they then push Jack Schlossberg out, but kind of trash RFK Jr., who, say what you will, actually stands for something and actually believes in something and is educated and had a job.
And it actually has the experience, and actually, after he was convicted of heroin possession in the 80s, part of his punishment was working at Riverkeeper, what then became Riverkeeper. He had to do community work, and that's how he got into the environmental movement. But you're right about Schlossberg, and Schlossberg has made some pretty nasty observations on social media. This was before he was running for Congress, about his cousin, and I thought they were pretty distasteful. And I actually interviewed Schlossberg, and I asked his campaign people, I said, are those nasty, social media posts still up there? And it was like, yeah, they are. But I couldn't find them. So I think he took them down because it wasn't, they were pretty unseemly. But you are right. He's overeducated, but he has no real experience. He did work for the State Department briefly, but again, his mother was an ambassador to Japan and Australia. I know he worked with her, but it's not the same thing. I mean, he really is sort of the Nepo baby who hasn't done a lot. I'm sure his heart's in the right place too, and he's worth $11 million. What's he worth?
Yeah.
That came out when his disclosures came out. So we'll see. But you're right to point out that irony, or like why aren't people supporting RFK Jr., but yet they've embraced Jack Schlossberg, who really doesn't have a lot to say.
No, he's overeducated, underemployed, and spends his time making bizarre TikToks attacking people. And he doesn't seem to really stand for anything. He just stands against stuff, but stuff as in actual people, and mocks them. It is distasteful. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of RFK Jr., but again, at least he's done something. And when you say he worked for the State Department, I would actually categorize Schlossberg as dabbling. It's the same thing as when he worked for Vogue and dabbled as their online
political correspondent. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then asked people such things as, is ketchup a condiment or a sauce? And you're going, wow, if that is the level of your probing. Okay. You know what? At least your uncle, buddy, at least he's got stuff going on and can actually cite facts. But I want to end on a question about the legacy of the Kennedys. What do you think the ultimate legacy is with the new generation of Kennedys trying to get into politics?
That's a good question. A lot of it is entitlement. And I'll even go back to the old legacy of the Kennedys. Like, one of the most interesting things I found in my research in the Diaries was this little tidbit where RFK Jr. is going to the funeral of JFK JFK's official photographer in the White House, and and at the funeral he sees all of his dad's, the people who used to work in the Attorney General's office. This is like in the late 90s. And they tell him a story that just blows me away. They say, we're really worried about your dad because he used to get into his car, and he would speed. He would go so much above the speed limit on this highway in Virginia, leaving Hickory Hill and going to his office on the Hill, that we were worried he was just going to be arrested for speeding and we were going to have a problem. So what did they do? They went to the Secretary of the Interior and they asked him to increase the speed limit on that stretch of road. And I'm like, are you kidding? For the Attorney General of the United States, you're going to do that much of a favor? So it's a legacy of entitlement. I mean, that begins, even before he's like on the political scene. And I just, that spoke so much about, how we bend over backwards for everything they do. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but
Yes, you have. I'm still kind of in shock because I do agree that the Kennedys have always had a level of entitlement that was off the charts. But the reason why people put up with RFK and JFK and their bad behavior, which was long and storied, and that Camelot really was a myth, the reason why they put up with it is that there was no press coverage on it. And they were protected for all these years. And I think the others, the children now expect the same slavish devotion.
Correct.
And I wonder what's going to happen when they don't get it. What happens if Jack Schlossberg does not win the election? Knock on wood. What happens if RFK Jr. does run for president and doesn't win?
They'll go on to do something, I don't know. Those are all good questions. But, you look at also the books that have been written about the Kennedys, a lot of them are just these hagiographies. Like I look at Nick Katzenbach's stuff on JFK and I'm like, can we just stop? Can we just tell the story of a real person with their complexities? I mean, this is what I hope I've done with RFK Jr. Like I don't take sides on him. I'm not a columnist. I'm just a reporter and I'm just going by what I've seen. And so I think he's very complex. I mean, everybody's complex, but Bobby is more complex than most people.
But that's what I love about your book, Isabel, is that nothing is black and white. Everything, just as in real life, is shades of gray. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate your time.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you. I'm honored.
Of course. And everyone out there, you need to go get this book. It is a page turner.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Now, remember, like, subscribe. I still find it crazy that tens of thousands of you come to watch these videos and enjoy them and forget to subscribe. So do it now. Hit that button and you'll get alerted every time I go on. And I just want to say thanks again for the full story. Again, go to my Substack, Paula Froelich Uncensored, and have the best day ever.